Picture this. You're completely isolated in the dead of winter, surrounded by absolute luxury, but trapped inside a metal tube with a cold-blooded killer. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unravel one of the most brilliant claustrophobic psychological thrillers ever constructed. We're talking about Agatha Christie's absolute masterpiece, Murder on the Orient Express. But today, we're not just reading a story. We're going to break down the facts, dissect the timelines, and get deep into the hidden psychology of this case, exactly like a modern true crime documentary. And the terrifying reality of their situation hits you right from the start. Imagine the sheer panic. The Orient Express has violently plowed into a massive snowdrift somewhere in the remote Balkans in the middle of the night. The train is dead in its tracks. The passengers are entirely cut off from the outside world. And that means the ruthless assassin who just struck in the dark, yeah, they haven't fled into the night. They couldn't. They are literally still walking the corridors, locked inside with everyone else. So we are going to treat this fictional crime scene with absolute forensic precision. We'll analyze the evidence, the red flags, and the intense psychological manipulation tactics exactly as the legendary Belgian detective Hercule Poirot experienced them. We're going to strip away all that glamorous romance of 1930s train travel to look at the raw, cold, and honestly baffling facts of a brutal midnight assassination. Now, here is where things get completely wild. The crucial point of this case is the sheer impossibility of the murder. The victim is a wealthy, incredibly sinister-looking American guy named Ratchet. He's found dead in his bed, having been stabbed a brutal 12 times. But check out this forensic nightmare. Ratchet's compartment door was securely locked and chained from the inside. The window is wide open, blasting freezing air into the room, which obviously suggests the killer climbed out and fled. But outside, there is a perfectly pristine, unbroken blanket of snow. Absolutely zero footprints. The killer seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind a completely sealed box. So let's map out the timeline, because tracking these eerie late-night noises gives us our exact forensic window. At 12:30 a.m., the train hits the snowdrift and grinds to a halt. Just 7 minutes later, at 12:37, Ratchet's service bell frantically rings. The conductor runs over, knocks, and a voice from inside calls out in French, "It is nothing, I was mistaken." A bit later, Poirot hears a heavy thud and the sound of running water. Finally, Ratchet's shattered pocket watch is discovered shoved under his pillow, its hands permanently frozen at exactly 1:15 a.m. It looks like a perfectly documented, tightly timed crime. But you know as well as I do, in true crime, a perfect timeline is usually the first sign of a perfect lie. As the investigation kicks off, a massive bombshell drops. We discover the victim was harboring a monstrous secret, and it shifts our entire perspective on the case. Ratchet wasn't just some rich businessman traveling with his secretary. When Poirot uncovers a partially charred fragment of a threatening letter in the dead man's cabin, the victim's true, horrifying identity is dragged out into the light. Ratchet was actually a man named Cassetti. And Cassetti was a brutal mobster and a child murderer. He was a mastermind who orchestrated the infamous kidnapping of the Armstrong baby over in America. Cassetti collected the massive ransom, but ruthlessly murdered the child anyway. Then, he used his immense wealth and a web of legal loopholes to completely escape justice. And the fallout? It utterly destroyed the entire Armstrong family. The mother died in premature childbirth from the trauma, the heartbroken father shot himself, and an innocent, falsely accused maid threw herself from a window. Cassetti was, by every definition, a monster. And suddenly, we have a massive, emotionally charged motive for his assassination. But the physical evidence left behind at the scene? It's an absolute forensic disaster. The doctor examines the body and realizes the 12 stab wounds make zero sense. Some are deep and fatal, while others are basically just scratches. Some look like they were struck by a right-handed person, others clearly by a left-handed person. It's literally as if multiple different killers took turns in the dark. And the clues scattered all over the floor? You've got a pipe cleaner belonging to a colonel, an incredibly expensive woman's handkerchief embroidered with the letter H, and a specific type of flat match used by the killer. The whole scene is a chaotic mess. Poirot takes one look at this and immediately realizes something is very, very wrong. Think about it. The charred note, which the killer desperately tried to burn, confirms Cassetti's dark past finally caught up with him. That clue feels real. It was a mistake, meant to be destroyed. But a pipe cleaner? A fancy, highly identifiable monogrammed handkerchief? They feel entirely artificial. They're almost too perfectly placed, like props deliberately left on a stage to point the police in very specific, yet totally contradictory directions. I really want you to ask yourself, how do you reconcile this? How do you have a criminal mastermind capable of executing an impossible locked room murder, walking through solid walls, who is simultaneously sloppy enough to drop their own personal monogrammed handkerchief right next to the body? A killer smart enough to drug Wretched, bypass a loaded gun under his pillow, and vanish, but dumb enough to leave a literal trail of breadcrumbs? It just doesn't add up. And the investigation gets even murkier with these bizarre, almost cinematic red herrings. Passengers start reporting phantom figures roaming the dead of night corridors. One guy claims he was chasing a small, dark man with a high, womanish voice, completely dressed up as a train conductor. Others, including Poirot himself, catch a fleeting, shadowy glimpse of a mysterious woman wearing a scarlet silk kimono embroidered with dragons. It's terrifying, it's highly theatrical, and it perfectly serves to confuse the timeline. So Poirot systematically begins interviewing the passengers, and he hits an overwhelmingly complex wall of silence. Look at this group. We have 12 complete strangers. An American secretary, a loud American widow, a cool English governess, a stiff British colonel, a Russian princess, Hungarian royalty, the list goes on. And incredibly, every single one of them has an absolutely airtight alibi. They all perfectly vouch for each other in these neat interlocking pairs. No one is cracking. But if you look closely, the psychological red flags start to show. Poirot remembers a highly suspicious, whispered conversation he overheard before the murder even happened. It was between the detached, icy governess Mary Debenham and the rigid Colonel Arbuthnot. She whispered, "Not now, when it's all over, when it's behind us." When what is over? That right there, that's a massive slip-up. It reveals pure premeditation. They absolutely knew something major was going down on this journey. At this point, Poirot realizes he's dealing with a crime of cool, calculating intellect. The physical evidence, like the broken watch pointing to 1:15 a.m., was deliberately faked to hand the killer a rock-solid alibi. And that voice, speaking French at 12:37 a.m., Ratchet didn't even speak French. It was the killer, literally standing in the room with the dead body, pretending to be the victim to buy time. To beat a mastermind like this, Poirot knows he has to stop looking at the manufactured physical clues. Instead, he begins to methodically attack the psychological armor of the passengers, probing mercilessly for their breaking points. And man, when he applies that pressure, the results are shocking. The passengers' false identities completely collapse. One by one, their true faces come out. The Hungarian countess? She literally altered the name on her passport because she is actually Helena, Mrs. Armstrong's grieving sister. That intimidating Russian princess? She was the murdered baby's godmother. The cool English governess was the Armstrong's governess. The weeping Swedish lady was the baby's nurse. Almost every single person in that train car was intimately, tragically connected to the destroyed Armstrong family. Which brings us face to face with the ultimate true crime puzzle. I want you to really think about the math here. What are the actual statistical odds of a grieving sister, a godmother, a governess, a nurse, a family friend, a loyal valet, and a devoted chauffeur all just happening to book tickets on the exact same train coach in the dead of winter, right next door to the very monster who destroyed their lives? It is statistically, fundamentally impossible. The terrifying, brilliant truth of this entire mystery hinges on one single inescapable number: 12. Remember the autopsy? There were exactly 12 stab wounds on the victim's body. And there just so happened to be exactly 12 passengers sitting in that specific train carriage. With the pieces finally together, Poirot gathers all the suspects into the dining car and presents two contrasting theories. Theory 1 is the easy out, the mafia hit. An outside assassin wearing a stolen conductor's uniform snuck onto the train, stabbed Cassetti, dropped some random clues, and jumped off before the snowdrift trapped them. It neatly explains the physical evidence for the police. But Theory 2? Theory 2 is the dark, psychological truth. Every single passenger in the carriage participated in a highly synchronized, premeditated execution. The reality is a staggering revelation of vigilante justice. Ratchet wasn't killed by one person. He was killed by all of them. The obnoxious American widow, Mrs. Hubbard, she was actually Linda Arden, a famous tragic actress and the grandmother of the murdered baby. She gathered the broken, surviving pieces of her family and their fiercely loyal staff. Together, they formed a self-appointed jury of 12. They drugged the monster, and in the pitch black of night, one by one, each of the 12 passengers walked into that room and inflicted exactly one stab wound. It was a beautifully terrifying mosaic of grief and revenge. They purposely faked the clues, wore the red kimono, and smashed the watch to confuse the timeline, engineering the ultimate impossible crime. As we wrap up this analysis, we have to leave you with a deeply unsettling psychological question. In the end, Poirot, a man who represents order and the law, chooses to officially accept Theory 1. He allows the passengers to walk free. He literally lets a jury of 12 get away with premeditated murder. And it makes us all question that incredibly fragile line between the rigid rules of the legal system and the raw, bleeding desire for true justice. If